Okay, welcome to the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida chapter study group for July 2022. This is our 45th consecutive class. We come to you from all over the world, even though we are Florida. Our mission here is to bridge the gap between the industry leaders and business analysts by building partnerships with professionals, educators, and employers so that we may empower, instruct, and engage the Tampa Bay IT community. But as you know, we work with more than just Tampa Bay. We have all of North Florida as our territory. We also have people from all over the world that have joined us, and we will continue to serve them by providing study groups, mentoring, resume reviews, networking, whatever we can to benefit. Come on, change. You can access us in a variety of different ways. This is the Tuesday night study group here at the top line. We have our meetup that announces our study groups and as well as our lunch and learns. Zoom online is how you've connected with us today. Past meeting recordings is here highlighted in turquoise. We have recorded a majority of our 45 classes. The IIBA site for Tampa Bay is listed, our own website, meetup, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our official LinkedIn page. So if you need to access us, you can access us one of those ways, or you can access us individually. Our board, our board is made up of volunteers. Cliff Gray is online with us right now. He's our president. Lori is our vice president. Caitlin and Priscilla are our board members at large, which basically mean they don't hold a specific position. They just lean in whenever we have work to get done and they have bandwidth. My name is Thea Raisins. I'm the vice president of career and professional development for the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida chapter. And you can access me through LinkedIn. Here's my address on LinkedIn, Thea Raisins. And if you have any questions or concerns or want assistance, that's the way to reach me. We need more board members. We've had people that have been board members for multiple years, and we need some fresh blood. And if you want to be a specific role, let us know. If you want to be a board member at large, let us know. Being a member does not mean that you have to be a member for a board member for years. It just means that you're making yourself available to us for a certain period of time. It's up to your discretion to help us get things accomplished. We have a couple of things that are outstanding. We have some things that we'd like to do to grow to be able to benefit our members more easily. And we need you, your bandwidth, your accessibility. With us tonight is Bob Churchill. Bob is a CBAP certified business analyst. He also has a bunch of other things that he has earned certifications on. He has his website. You can see it here, rpchurchill.com, where he has a large number of articles and presentations that he has set up to help business analysts and people of other professions understand more about this profession. In addition to this, he has Lean, Six Sigma, project management, mechanical engineering, finance, process flow. He's done quite a number of impressive things, and I encourage you to check out his website. Come on, advance. Tonight, we are going to be joined by Damon Drake. Damon is a developer, one of the very best developers I've ever gotten to work with. Let me show you his LinkedIn profile here. Damon is, here he is right here. Damon has been a developer for how many years, Damon?
Too long, probably about 22 years.
22 years. One of the reasons I wanted Damon to join us is so that as business analysts, we know that if we're working with software development, specifically, we're going to work with developers, but even if we're not working with a software development project, we're going to end up working with some type of development. There's going to be an API that needs to be created that accesses a bank. There's going to be some kind of automation that needs to be put into place. There's just a variety of different ways that you're going to need to work with developers. So I asked Damon to come in, and I told him I would do the interview so he wouldn't have to figure out exactly what to say. And I want y'all to help me to lean in and ask questions. The first question I'd like to know, Damon, is when you approach a project as a developer, what kind of team are you typically looking at whenever you have, is it a development lead, a couple of other developers, front-end developers, back-end developers? What kind of architects? What do you have?
Well, it's throughout my career, it's greatly just depended on the set. I'd say for the majority of my career, I was a solo developer who essentially had to do everything from essentially BA type roles to managing the project myself to programming the project. What I look for more nowadays is an actual team that we all work together. They have some type of organization such as Scrum or doing agile development. And they have a separation of duties, meaning that there is a business analyst, there is someone who manages the project, there is someone who actually goes in between me and the actual customer to negotiate items or look at other things of that nature. On here recently, I've mostly been a C# backend developer, which I greatly enjoy, and that gets me away from the front end. But that is one thing I've done too, is front end programming, which is the HTML, making a website, making the actual look and feel of whatever is being developed.
So let's break it down for people that don't know development, and I think most of the people here on the call probably know some. Front-end development is the UI development, the user interface, what it looks like on the front end, how it behaves, as far as we understand from the people that are using it, right?
Correct, yeah.
So front-end development is going to be HTML, PHP. What else is currently being used?
A big one that we've seen used at our last job was React. That's a big one that's being used. Vue is being used. Angular is being used. Let's see, a new one that just came out by Microsoft that hasn't really matured just yet is Blazor. And that's some of the front end development tools.
Okay. Let's see, you said you have experience with HTML. Tell us what 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses are of HTML that we would need to know as business analysts.
All the frameworks that I mentioned previously rely heavily on HTML, Angular, React, all those. HTML is the language of the web, and if you don't know how to manipulate HTML, then you can't really do any web design or make things custom for individuals of what they want for their project.
Okay, so that's front end development. So back end development is how would you describe that?
I would describe it as the hidden voodoo magic that programmers do in the closet. Nobody gets to see it, but it's pretty dark and a lot of fun. It would be like an engine of your car. Essentially, when you drive a car around, most people just see the outside of it. They think, oh man, that's a pretty orange color. I like the shape of it. The headlights look great. But really what's making the car run and go is what kind of engine it's got under the hood. And that's pretty much what backend is programming is like. It's the full-blown horse of the entire operation. Yeah, everything might look good on the outside, the exterior, flawless paint, everything great, but the backend programming is the true engine of the car. It's what makes everything go. Without it, not much would happen. Okay.
So give us an idea of the popular backend development tools that are currently being used.
There's 3 big platforms. There's the Google platform, there's the AWS platform, and then there's the Microsoft platform. And I'm sure we'll probably talk about cloud later, won't we, Thea?
Yes, we will.
Yeah, we'll hit on those then. So the main languages just depends on which one of those you're using. For the Microsoft.NET, C# is the one that is highly used. That's the one I use most of. When you work with AWS, they like to use a lot of Ruby on Rails and that type of language. And
Wait
then
a
when
minute.
you move,
Tell us what AWS stands for, because BAs need to know that.
oh, Amazon Web Services is what that stands for.
Okay.
And then also there is the Apple iOS programming, and that's in Objective-C for now. So those are kind of the big three, but those are what I would consider a niche. Like you wouldn't hire me specifically to go do anything on AWS or with iOS because those languages aren't my bread and butter. I could do those, but you're going to be waiting a little bit for me to pick up on the learning curve.
Gotcha. So when we talk about full stack developer, it's somebody that can do something front end and something back end, right?
Correct.
Okay. So beyond front end and back end, what other areas of development are there for developers or architects?
I would say there are cloud architects. Since everything is going to the cloud, essentially what the cloud is they have a bunch of different services out on the internet that you can use. So if I need storage, there's a storage service I can use on the cloud. It's called Azure Storage in .NET. It's called S2, S3 Storage and Amazon Web Services. They all pretty much have the same services. But depending on what services you want to utilize or connect into, you can break it up into many different things, kind of architecturally wise and programming wise. The thing that I seem to be more used on in the software world is when it comes to anything that's related to database, modeling, mapping data structures, setting up schemas, talking to databases and things along that line.
Okay. Tell us what an architect does that's different than a developer.
An architect is someone who goes out and they actually look at all these cloud services. Since the services are separated, there is unique ways that you have to take into account to facilitate the communication between them. And what an architect does is they take the bigger picture that's out there of what you're wanting to do, and they take the little bitty services, which are kind of like pieces of the puzzle, and they start connecting them to finish off the puzzle. So we have a good idea of a roadmap of a project. So we know, hey, we're going to use an on-premise database here, but yet we also need this app to go out and talk to the cloud to get some events. We also might need to use something called Redis caching, which is a distributable cache that anything else can use. So it's someone who takes the bits and pieces of all this and determines this is how we are going to use it for this particular piece of software. And so you can kind of get an idea of, all right, as a programmer, this is going to be my flow. I can grab this information from over here. I can grab some other items I need from over here, but this is how the program is laid out and constructed or architected in order to get things going.
Okay, tell us the difference between developing for desktops and such and developing for mobile. Do you have that information?
That just honestly with that, they're pretty much about the same anymore in terms of what you kind of have to go through. If you're developing specifically for a desktop app, you're going to be pretty much stuck in a language that's specifically for that environment. Luckily, C# is cross-platform with .NET Core. It'll run on Linux. It'll run on Mac. It'll run on, of course, Windows machines. So you can do all your programming in that one language and design it out. And there's not too much friction there. The friction comes when you get in the mobile world because the mobile world don't all really want to agree on what they want to use. They haven't really fully consolidated to one language yet. There are some things out there. A thing I was looking at recently is called Flutter. And what Flutter is, it's a framework. If you ever hear a programmer talk about framework, essentially they've got bundled up a bunch of tools that we can use in order to create the software we need to. And anymore, we're kind of highly dependent on frameworks because it's just a bunch of pre-built tools out there that we can already use, and we don't have to make our own tools. And so with these frameworks that they have, it's kind of phone dependent. The biggest problem I've had with dealing with mobile is I can get this to work on Android and I can get this to work on the Microsoft platform, but getting anything into iOS, now that becomes a chore. So it's just, you pretty much, I would liken it to having the right tool for the job. I mean, not everything can be fixed with a hammer. Sometimes you might need a socket. Sometimes you might need a wrench. So depending on whatever you're getting into, you got to make sure you have the right tool.
Okay.
And with iOS, a hammer always works.
It's true. Okay, I've got two more questions. Tell me what, oh, Yulia raised her hand. Yulia, what's your question?
Yeah, I have two questions about mobile applications. What is a range to develop a mobile application? And is there any cost to upload that application on Google Play or Apple Store?
Oh, for mobile development?
Can be rough estimate.
I haven't done it in a while. When I did do iOS programming as a developer, I had to go through essentially an application form, get approved for that application form, and then I had to pay $99 a year. And this would be back in about 2016, 2017, since I've last dealt with it. So things have probably changed. But I had to pay $99 a year just to be a certified developer and be able to push things to the iOS store. And even pushing to the iOS store, you had to put your app up. They had to go through it, basically make sure it met all their guidelines. And then to actually publish it to their store and get it listed, it was an additional fee on top of that. Fee-wise, I found that iOS cost a heck of a lot more to get up and going than doing something with Android. At that time, I was paying $35 a year for Android just to be able to publish stuff to their store. But once I published stuff to their store, I didn't have to pay to have it listed or go through any other hoops. So it seems, at least from what I know from 2016, 2017, it was cheaper back then to push development to Android or the Google Play Store rather than push it to the iOS store.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at development for mobile, you might consider what your demographic is. Are they people that would use more Apple than Android? Apple also used to, and I don't know if they still do, used to require code upgrades to match their system on a much more rigorous schedule than Android.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have another question, Yulia?
Yeah, how much would cost to develop a mobile app? Just range.
Oh, if I was to charge for a mobile app?
I guess, yeah, based on your experience. I'm just curious. The price can start from and go up to, I don't know.
It honestly depends on what you're wanting with a mobile app. Recently, I've developed a mobile app that talks to my reef tank. I have a saltwater reef tank, and essentially, if I want to see what my water parameters are, add water parameters, and take pictures or something like that, it was a fairly simple app to do that, and it probably took me a total of about 20 hours. Usually, as a developer, at least at my level, for mobile, I usually charge about $75 an hour. So if we took a simple app and say a simple app's going to run about 40 hours, it'd be 70 times 40. If you had a much bigger app that needed a lot more features, it it would greatly depend on speccing the project out and getting an idea of how long it was going to take, and then applying the appropriate cost to it.
Okay,
So-
thank you. Thank you, Damon.
You're welcome.
Okay, next question, Damon, is what is an API?
It's an advanced programming interface, or an application programming interface. An API is, the best way to describe it is somebody has their own library set up and they have their own books to check out. But in order to get into the front of the library, you got to have your library card before you can even go in there. When you hit an API, you go in for specifics. Like if a good example of an API would be the OAuth systems that Google, Microsoft, Twitter, Facebook, all those individuals use. You can actually go through their OAuth APIs and figure out what information do I need to send to them so I can have a user authenticate with them, but then also send it back to me and say, hey, yeah, this person just logged into Google. They logged in successfully. They're authorized. Now you can go do whatever you need to with them. So it's just different tools that somebody else has already built, that depending if they give you a good library card or not, that you can go in, check out, grab that data and go on. It's mostly for information transfer for data.
Okay. And tell us about what a JSON file is.
JSON is a structured file. Stands for JavaScript Object Notation, if you're interested in that. The reason it's useful is the way it's laid out for a developer makes a lot more sense. I find it easy to read it than XML, which is kind of its predecessor, or the technology it used to go up against. So it's easy to read. It's low bandwidth if you pass it across, but it's just a form of what we in programming call REST. We use a lot of acronyms in programming, but REST stands for representational state transfer. So essentially, if I have a user file over here and I've got first name, last name, this information, and it's tied up in a database over here, and I want to import it over into this area in Excel, well, unless, this is Microsoft SQL Server and this is Excel that can just directly talk to each other, sometimes you need a go-between. And what the JSON file does is it takes that information out of here, it translates it here, so a middleman can then take it and then translate that onto Excel. But it keeps the state of the data. So the JSON file keeps the first name, the last name, and items that we got from the database. It stores them here in a generic, easily readable format, and then we can take that and transfer that on.
Excellent. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've reached the end of my questions about different kinds of technologies or specific things that I think that BAs are going to be dealing with. Does anyone else have any questions before we move on? Because the next section is going to be how can BAs best work with developers, and how can developers best work with BAs? Any other questions about technology? Let me check the chat. See, we've got a few things in there.
No, that was pretty good.
Okay. Bob included real-time and control systems, graphics, games. Okay, this is Bob's experience. Okay. Okay, so next section is, as a BA, Damon, whenever we start a project, breaking it down into starting, middle, and finishing, when we start a project, what do you need from the BA?
Total cooperation. No.
It's true, though.
No, I'd say as a developer, what I like from a BA, if we're starting something out, is to pretty much have a very solid picture of what we're going to do and where we're going to go. As a developer, it helps to know the end result. or what the end result should be before we even start out. I've gotten a lot of things in the past where someone's like, it's like, well, I need you to do this report. And it's like, okay, well, what columns do you want in the report? How do you want this laid out? Well, I don't know. And it's like, can't do much for you. So that's where a BA comes in real handy, because most of the time when they give you something, it's like, hey, here's what we got. Here's the information. This is what I gathered that they're trying to get it to look like. And then they'll also give other requirements and specifics along the way. I always call it the weird flight. I always tease my wife. It's like, well, I got the weird flight request at work today, which essentially means they told me, hey, pack your bag. We're going on a trip. Okay, what do I pack in the bag? Yeah, exactly. Nobody's told me where we're going. I mean, so if you packed a bathing suit and a towel and we end up in Alaska, hey, I'm sorry. That's just how it happens. So that's kind of one of the things you have to make sure that it really helps out a BA to a developer is we get the roadmap up front, we know what we've got, and then we know where we're going, and then the development happens in the middle. And so that's kind of what developers rely on a BA the most for, is they usually have the general idea of what we got and where we're going.
Cliff, I noticed that you're grinning. Do you have something you'd like to add to that?
No.
Okay. Cliff is a developer extraordinaire too, so I figure he has something to add to this eventually.
You've had the trip flight experience before, where they say pack the bags, we're going somewhere?
Yeah. Luckily for the last 3 years, I haven't gone anywhere. And I've already told the company, it's like, you know what? We've proven that we don't have to go anywhere for the last 3 years. I don't want to go anywhere ever again. So we're in that stage now.
So one of the things that I really appreciated working with Damon, especially at the beginning of projects, and he would do this consistently through the project, is I would say, okay, the client has this situation. They're trying to solve this problem. They want this information. And he would look at it and come back and he would say, well, what if we did it a different way? There's this easier way to do it that doesn't require going through, 6 gates. We only have to go through 2 gates if I just connect these 2 things. And it's like, that's it, that works perfectly, but the way that we thought that we were going to have to do it, we can't see under the hood. We can't see the engine. And Damon gets to get down and take the chassis apart. And he understands maybe there's a better way to do it. But if we don't tell him what the goal is, what the purpose is, what the timing is, what required information there is, he can't figure out those wonderfully creative things. Speaking of creative, I want to mention this. When you're working with developers, ladies and gentlemen, please understand that these people are not robotic. They are some of the most creative, intelligent people that you're ever going to get to work with. And their creativity comes through in their interesting and unexpected ways to get things accomplished, that they will get accomplished what you needed. So give them the respect and bandwidth to get those things done. Okay, so Damon, that's the beginning of the project. During the middle of the project, as we continue to bring you additional details, maybe we show the client something and they say, that's not quite exactly right. We want it a little different. How best can we work with you at that point?
When the client says that they want it a little bit different, it's more kind of digging back in and finding out exactly what they're after. And that usually requires, going and saying, okay, this is what we were given and this was where we headed. How do we need to tweak where we're headed? And essentially the BA, if at that point they can, talk more with the client and get more of an idea of where the client's going and get those requirements gathered, that kind of helps us, because usually we're working on more than just one item at a time. So that frees us up as developers to continue working on something else for the client to look at later, while the BA's fine-tuning stuff down.
One of the benefits of Agile, which means small increments of development at a time, means that we can show the client what the development is and they can make corrections as we go along, and we don't have to do, you know, a year's worth of development and then they say that's not what I wanted. We're able to say, okay, here's the landing page, and they'll go, wait, that's not the right logo, you know, so we could just change the logo and move on. So I appreciate that about Agile. So Damon, in talking about Agile, I wanted to talk about when or how often do you feel like it's important that you as a developer be included in meetings with the client? Under what situations would you want to be included?
If there was some extremely exotic use case for how they wanted something transformed, it's kind of hard to explain without getting into specifics. But if they need 3 dolphins to jump through a hoop while a clown juggles chainsaws, I kind of wonder, why do we really need this? Is this an actual process that we still need to do, or can we just have the dolphins swimming around? It's because sometimes there are weird business logic that you come across as a developer, and you're like, who put this in play? Do we really need this? So that's a good time for, what we're talking about, Agile. I got derailed.
No, we're talking about when would the developer want to be in the meeting with the clients?
Yeah, just those weird use cases like that. And that way we can kind of guide the conversation and kind of figure out, is this really what they're wanting, or will they accept something else that's not this, intrusive or this extravagant? Sometimes there's things that happen that are really not needed. That's where a programmer should excel, is trying to make things efficient and not have a bunch of weird logic or weird business rules to go around. And that's the time we probably need the most clarification or like to get involved so we fully understand.
Okay.
I found that a lot, Thea, like this current project anyway. But, when you're bringing over a system that is 25 years old or 20 years old, you get a lot of that, well, that's the way we've always done it. This is the way it always works. This is the way. Yeah. And Damon, you're smiling. I know you've seen this before.
I've seen this about 5 months ago.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, but you know what? We're dealing with technology that's not 20 years old. We could do this, this way. We don't need 5 staging databases in between. We can do it right now. Direct connects or, stuff like that. But you see so many consultants that are just afraid to ask why. They're getting paid by the client. We have a reputation for asking that, justifying everything. You got to make the client justify their needs sometimes. So you don't get into those rabbit holes of stuff that they did 25 years ago. Get the answers. Yeah, we always did it that way.
Can I ask a question? Today I was thinking about it. Is there a best practice on data warehouse? For example, is it a good idea to use only one data warehouse? Or is it better to use several data warehouse just in case if one of them will go down for some reason? And outsource data warehouse like Amazon or Databricks, for example.
It would depend on when you're dealing with the cloud for Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. Usually they have items already set in place. It's called geo-redundancy. And the back end, us developers can see it when we're configuring items. And geo-redundancy means that, yeah, I've got my warehouse, let's say in Texas, but hey, can you just go ahead and take this service and distribute that to California as well? Let's go ahead and throw that in China. So those services offer items like that, even though you're just using the Azure data warehouse or the Amazon Web Service data house, they can actually split that out for you automatically. And that's part of the service fees and service charges. So they take care of that for you. And that's one of the reasons why there's a big push to the cloud, because we don't have to worry about, oh man, this data center is going to go down. I got to go to another data center. Well, no, they take care of it automatically for you. And so it makes
Because-
things nicer at
Yeah,
a
because I was
price.
thinking I have an internship and a company is trying to get rid of Redshift. And then I was thinking, okay, so they need to migrate all data to somewhere, and probably it's one data warehouse. And then I was thinking, okay, is it a great idea to put all your eggs in one basket? That's why I asked the question today.
Well, your
Yeah.
data warehouse servicer will have that redundancy. With Microsoft, you could pay in multiple tiers. So you could be across 3 different zones, East, Pacific, like you said, China or India. But you pay extra for that, but your data is backed up at multiple places for that reason. You still access it in one place, but it's stored in multiple.
Thank you.
Okay,
okay.
I apologize. I froze up. Thank y'all for filling in. Let me ask you, what did you hear from me last? Because I want to be sure you got everything I had. It was that memorable, huh? That's great.
It's been a while.
Okay.
She was asking a lot about redundancy and
Yeah.
trying to manually set it up. But most of the
Okay.
service providers take care of that for you,
Okay.
basically.
Okay.
Yeah, we were talking the last about communication between developer and BA in the middle of the project. And Damon
Okay.
was giving his tips.
Okay, so let's talk about the end of the project. All the development has been done. We've shown the client the development in small increments as we go along. We're at UAT. Damon, at UAT, you are basically finished doing any work unless something in UAT fails. Is that correct?
No, usually that is not correct. Usually what has happened is, since as a developer, sometimes you work on more than one project. If you have a project that's getting close to UAT and it's getting ready to go to production, usually there's another project that you've started up on. So you're just kind of in the light startup phases of another project. You've got bandwidth to open up and handle UAT issues really quickly, but you're not just sitting idle waiting for, someone to come back and say, oh, I got a bug in the UAT.
Okay, UAT is user acceptance testing, and especially in highly regulatory situations, you're going to have requirements that say somebody has to sign off and say that they accepted this. So user acceptance testing, UAT, is very important. Damon and I worked together at the nuclear power plant, and UAT there was so critical. We had to have not only the product owner, who was the client in that situation, sign off on it, but several of the users and then some independent auditors sign off on it that say that they accepted it into the realm of their areas. So there were a lot of different UAT testing done. We also had some very strict QA testing that was supposed to have been done, and that required a lot of sign-offs as well. Okay, so let me go through environments real quick. People that do not have an understanding or experience with software development don't understand environments. So tell me if I get this wrong, Damon, or tell me if I get it right. There's typically 4 different environments for a project, and there can be more, but there's the dev environment, which is development, which is what the developers they create their code and insert it into dev, and then the QA person or the developer moves that code into QA to do testing. And then once it passes in QA, they move it into UAT, which is the 3rd environment, which is like, it's like you have 4 different tables in a room, and you're building a replica of New York City. So in your first table, you start New York City and say, okay, that's right. And then you go to the second table and you do the same thing on the second table. And while you're doing that, somebody else is working on the next building on the first table, which is dev. So dev is working, then QA is working, then they pass QA and they move it over to the UAT table, and they say, okay, it passed QA, so we're going to be sure it works in UAT. And then you get users in there to do user acceptance testing. Very often the BA does the testing first before anybody touches it. And we touch it in dev, we touch it in QA, and then we touch it in UAT. And while we're working on the third table, they're still working on the first table, putting up another skyscraper. And as they keep doing that, it keeps migrating to the next environment. So there's dev, QA, UAT, and then you go into production or prod. So you've got at least those 4 different environments to work in. Is there a better way to say it, Damon?
That pretty much covers how environments work. Harry brought up a good point too, and said sometimes there's a training environment. Sometimes the training environment and the UAT go hand in hand. I always think of the UAT as another item that we haven't talked about. It's called a release candidate, which means that we think this is really, really good to go to production. And then it turns into that release candidate before we go to production. You'll probably see it if any of you have ever dealt with Microsoft. You'll see things like, RC1 or RC2. That RC usually stands for release candidate, which means this is safe for you to use, but we're not giving you 100% guarantee on it. There's probably going to be some things you might run into. And so that's what they do as well for like training, release candidate, UAT. Sometimes they're synonymous amongst the 3 of them. Sometimes they're different depending on the process.
So what's the difference between a release candidate number and a version number? Can it be the same?
That just comes down to naming standardizations and nomenclature of whatever development team is releasing it. That kind of goes back to if they have standards. Google used to release, the Chrome browser on, just a major, version 1, version 2, version 3. And then they started going to this, 147.2 point, blah, 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 blah. It just depends on what the developing team dictates as a standard, and they go from there.
Can I jump in for a sec?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So when you have a version number, let's say you're in dev and you start with a version 0.1. You move version 0.1 to your QA, then it moves along to UAT or your RC1 or pre-prod. So that version number that you give them is going to be tracked. So that's the way you can make reference back to the dev to say, hey, this version of what I'm looking at, I'm finding these 2 bugs. So when they release another version, 0.02 or 3, then you should have fixed those issues that you found in 0.01. And you keep going. So the version number basically helps you to track the issues and to make sure that the releases that you're doing can be traced. So when you get to RC1, you should have like my friend said, forgive me, I'm driving, I didn't look at your name, Damon, right?
Damon,
so
yes.
Like Damon said, the RC1 now should be pretty good to go to production, but you may find something. So you can then tell which version of the software you have in RC1, right? And if you're finding stuff there, you may want to say, okay, that's a showstopper. We don't want to go to production with it. Or you may want to accept the risk and move that to production. And while you're doing that with version maybe 0.04 in RC1 moving into production, you are getting version 5 in your UAT because somebody would have done something on that, some fixes were there, and you want to get that fast track. So, the version numbers really help you to keep track of what's going on, see the bugs, see the state, understand the issues. So when you make a reference to something, you are making reference to a version number, maybe the application, maybe the particular, maybe OS that application is. So you can really get down to the nitty-gritty of which part or where in the software you really have that issue, and it really helps. I just wanted to say that.
It's true. So the thing I want everyone to understand is if you are brand new to software development, please understand every company does it a little bit differently. Every company uses their software tools a little bit differently. Every company uses Jira differently. So whenever they say, do you have experience with Jira? You can say, I do have experience with Jira, but I do understand that your company probably has fields or practices that are different than everyone else, and I'm here to learn your processes. And it really is beneficial to have that confidence that just because you don't have experience in everything doesn't mean you can't learn the way that they're doing that. So I just saw a question here. I'm sorry, I had to open this up on my phone. Let's see, chat. So one release can have multiple versions. Do you remember AOL? And then AOL had a new version, and it was like the new, better, had more bells and whistles. And then we went, and now we have Teams, and now Teams has a new version every week. Yeah, one release can have multiple versions. Okay.
Used to be a long delay just because they sent you disc in the mail.
It did. Okay, wait, Bob, you're saying the short answer is no for one release can have multiple versions. Am I using the word wrong?
Well,
Yeah, a release is essentially a version, I think is what Bob's going to say.
and if you have a CI/CD train, where you're doing continuous incremental releases, what is a version? I mean, Amazon, every little bit of it is a separate piece, and the whole ecosystem works together. So they can do releases in 5 different areas every day, but there might be 300. So what's the version? What does that even mean?
Well, and as I look at things with modern development, when we used to look back at things in the day, probably in the 90s and 2000, we did look at version numbers, but with the things that we use as development tools in the back end, Git is one of them where we check in it's where we check in our source code. We can see every little bitty incremental change that comes along with it. And like Bob was talking about with, we call it CI/CD, which stands for continuous integration, continuous deployment. Things nowadays, I used to have to take my software, I used to have to compile it, then I used to have to go give it to somebody, and they'd have to install it and go from there. Nowadays, I don't do that. Essentially, I can check my code into this Git repository I was talking about, and if it makes it to the correct branch, it just automatically gets deployed, and really it's transparent to the end user when they pull up the product to use it. So it's a constant integration, and they really don't have versions. They pretty much just have fixes and kind of that type of thing. It's kind of hard to explain with how software development works today, because it's not like we're working and then, okay, cool, bang, bam, we got the release. No, it's all small increments, like he was talking about with Amazon. We make a small increment here, it works here, someone UAT'd it, cool, then now it goes to this branch, and boom, bam, it's deployed, and it was completely transparent. Nobody had to install anything, nobody had to update anything. It just kind of did it on its own.
So talk about what branches are.
Branches? And it depends on what kind of tree you have. What we do, and if anybody can display it, because I don't think I can display it, there's a thing out there, and what we do is we keep our code in different branches, and we sometimes we always have a main branch, and the main branch represents this code is stable. This means someone has UAT'd this, has given it the stamp approval, and that's on our main branch. And what we as developers do is when we go to make new code, we actually check out the main branch into our own branch, we make our changes, and then we send it back down through different branches along the way. Like I have my own personal branch that I'm working on, but there might be a main development branch which I can merge my code into, while other developers can merge their code into it too. They'll get my changes, I'll get their changes. And then that's kind of gone along the way until we say, hey, we've met this little bitty, kind of release point. And at that release point, we cut that version of the code we have in that branch down to our testing. And then that's where QA and BA takes over and says, we'll test all this and go through it and make sure it works. And then they take that and merge that into yet another branch, which I usually call release candidate. And that release candidate branch is then tied to the release candidate environment, which they take the business users, go through it, the people who need to see it, go through it. And once that's approved, then that merges back into the main branch. So now there's our new stable point that we can check out from. So it's just having different pieces of the software at different development levels. So it creates a history as you go along, so you can see all the individual changes that happen. And then when it gets to the final release, you can see all the changes that happened up to that release. So when you go back in time, if you do have a problem that you find in production, then you can start weeding back down through and we call them commits. When we commit something in, that's like us checking it in and saying, yeah, we're good to go with this. It needs to go into this other branch. But we can always look back on all those commits that we did to try to figure out which one was probably the bad one.
Very good.
That helps explain branches.
It does for me, but I understood a little bit before. Does anyone else have any questions about that or anything else?
I do. I mean, not about development anymore. Thank you, Damon. I have a question about certification, and I want to check how everybody is doing with their preparation, because right now I'm actively preparing and actively studying, and I had some questions about BABOK in general.
Okay. Before we start that, there's been a question several times about test questions for the IIBA. Let me tell y'all, unfortunately, I'm sorry you can't see my screen, but Watermark Learning and Bob, give us the name of the company that you used, please. But Watermark Learning has some free questions for test questions for the CBAP and IIBA certification. And there's another company that Bob used that he really likes. And I don't know if they have free test questions, but there are test questions available through those two companies.
I think it's called Adaptive.
Yes, Adaptive. That's right. Thank you. So the Watermark Learning has given us, the Florida chapter, a 10% discount on anything that you buy from them. So they have test questions, they have study groups, they have classes, they have virtual classes, they have in-person classes. I think Adaptive has a very similar thing. I don't know that they have a discount, but if you want the discount code for Watermark, just contact me through LinkedIn and I'll give you the code. Incidentally, after we finish our session of going through these different professions of people and things that we need to know as BAs, we're going to start through the test questions again, beginning with chapter 1, using the Watermark test questions, and just work our way through it again.
Nice.
And at the end of this meeting today, we're going to go through some of the questions that Yulia has in her, and I want to say very thorough studies of the BABOK in her preparation to get ready to take the test. So if y'all want to hang on for another hour, we're going to be on for an extra hour. And I'm going to be,
oh, wow.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's going to take that because your questions are very wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the question. If y'all want to navigate to the BABOK guide and online, you can go through the BABOK with us, and we can have the discussion on how the particular question needs to be answered or understood. But these are, let's see, I can see 17 questions on my screen, and that's not all the questions that she sent me. So I'm very excited about this. Yulia is one of the people that whenever we would go through test questions, not only would she usually know the right answer, but she would know the reason it was the right answer. So for her to have deep
You muted yourself.
So does anyone else have any questions for Damon?
Only gratitude. Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome. One thing I will say about developers and pertaining to BA, the best thing a BA can do for a developer is, quite frankly, be blunt. If you've got a problem, don't beat around the bush about it. Just tell us, hey, this is broke. This is why it's broke. You need to do this. Developers usually are, we're not robots, but we just like to hear things blunt and to the point rather than having a bunch of politically correct speak on top of it.
You're going to discover that every developer is individual, and sometimes you've got to go through a developer lead to be able to get the work done by the developers. You have to just learn how your organization does it.
But thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Damon, you make
Yeah,
us
usually
better.
there's a gatekeeper. You know, you sometimes with those developers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well,
Depends.
I'm kind of one of those
many-
developers you probably want to keep behind the gate, because I like to call myself a code monkey. I'd rather be shoved off in a closet just doing my little magic and not be bothered by people. So I don't play well with others.
the deal with gatekeepers and developers is this: if you have everybody in the world stopping by their desk or grabbing them in the hallway and saying, hey, would you just do this thing for me? They don't get to do their real job. They're trying to please everybody, and it causes distraction, it causes conflict, it causes a mess up of the priorities. So they do need a gatekeeper typically. And the gatekeeper's job is to protect them from all those people that would bring them questions on the side, and put everything in, say, JIRA, so that it is able to be visual, is able to be transparent, prioritized, and accountable. Okay, well, let's end this meeting and start the questions for Yulia. If you would like to stay on with us, you are very welcome. I'm going to keep the chat open because I can't show you my screen, so I'm going to be reading the questions. If you want to go to the BABOK, the web address is bpmtraining.net. So if
I can share my screen.
Okay, that would be awesome. Thank you.
And yeah, for those who can stay maybe for 15-20 minutes more, we can discuss the most important questions out of the whole list, which is very important from the book.
That's excellent.
And
That's
for
excellent.
as long as you need me, I may sound like a frog, but I'm here for you.
Bob is fighting COVID, ladies and gentlemen. So we appreciate him being here at all. And on top of his very consistent attendance over the last 45 meetings. Okay, Yulia, go ahead and share your screen.
I think we have one person.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I hate to interrupt. I'm sorry. I didn't get in the beginning, so I couldn't give a proper introduction, but thank you guys for having me. I am an aspiring business analyst, not aspiring, I am a business analyst, but I'm working on my IIBA certification. And you guys are well known for helping people out, providing resources. I've actually connected with, Mr. Let me double check his name. Oh, Nuggets.
Me.
Gray.
Yes, Mr. Cliff and whatnot, and I appreciate you guys for hosting this, and then even having the post recordings. I'm slowly making my way through each one to figure out how to best prepare for the IIBA certification. So I just wanted to say a little hello. My name's Ray. I am not new. I'm not a new business analyst, but I'm a newbie compared to everyone else. But I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to make it a point to make it to each of these meetings, especially over Zoom, before one of the night meetings I typically have. And I'd love to connect with you guys on LinkedIn. And if you guys have any resources or anything that I can add value to you guys, since you guys provide all of this for free, let me know. I'd love to contribute in any way I can.
Well, if you'd like to be a member of our board, we would appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am. I'd love to. that?
I think it's the 8th class that we had. We talked about how to go through the application for the certification. If you haven't watched that one, it might be a good thing to do because it takes a little bit of time to get that done.
Yeah, it does. I already passed it, so I was cleared, and now I just need to take an exam and hopefully
Okay.
pass.
Hi everyone. I also
People
hi everyone. It is Harry here.
speak on areas of their expertise, so feel free to jump in with that too.
Right. Someone else was introducing themselves?
Yes, that's me, Harry Barar here. Actually, I'm from New Zealand, and I found this session is very informative. And I am recently joined as a business analyst, and I'm new to IIBA as well, and just working on my certification. So
Very
thank you
good.
so much, Cliff, for sending all the details, and I will get in touch with you guys next week. And I have a meeting now because it's Wednesday morning here. So I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for this information and giving me the chance to jump in.
You're very welcome. Everyone is welcome.
Cool. Thank you so much. See you guys. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, Yulia, which question do you feel like is the very most important that you want to cover?
It's important, and I think that is a quick one, right? So we have requirements and design cycle, right?
Okay,
Which is on page 20, right
Page
here in the
20.
book.
Incidentally,
Uh-huh.
I sincerely appreciate you putting the page numbers there. That makes it a whole bunch easier to be sure that we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
so
a paperback, not PDF number.
yes.
I'm
So-
sharing it.
So what you're seeing there is basically the new version of the Plan, Do, Check Act that we had 20 or 30 years ago. So this is, why do I want it? What are the needs? What do I want? What are the conditions? And then you assess the outcomes. So it's the Plan, Do, Check, Act, just going in circles to be sure that you keep doing the cycle to continue to be sure requirements are met.
Oh, this is interesting.
There's another graphic I have. I'll find it for you.
Thank you, Damon.
Oh, thank you guys very much. I'm going to head out. My wife has not eaten supper, and she's starting to send me evil text if we need to get something to eat. So I'm going to head out and go do that.
You
But take
care.
care, and thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Damon.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, Bob, you said you're going to send us.
Well, I have, let me share my screen for a second.
Okay.
Because yeah, in the book they don't say how to use this cycle.
No, it really doesn't. You just start at the top and go you go clockwise through the different. It's almost like that idea that you start out at an airplane at a very high level and it's like, okay, I see this thing down there and it's round, and you get lower and you say, okay, it's round, but it's got a wall built around it. So, it's like, why do I want it? What are the needs? What is it that I want? How do I describe it? And then what are the conditions in which it would work or function or that? And at that point, you assess the outcome. Is this what I wanted? And then you can go around again, or you can start on the next thing if it satisfies.
Can you all see my blue screen?
I can see your blue screen.
All right. So I told you before about my framework, which has all these steps going down the left side, right? And then we've also talked about these 6 knowledge areas in the BABOK, which are the top middle columns. Now, really, my framework is just a restatement of what's in the BABOK. If you see the bold X's basically go from top left to lower right, right? So the BABOK's telling you a story. I'm just making it more explicit. But my understanding is that diagram really talks about these requirements, and requirements come in business requirements is why are you doing the whole thing? Stakeholder requirements is what are you trying to accomplish in detail? The solution requirements are about the design, and then once you build it and deploy it, the transition requirements excuse me, are about the implementation. Excuse me. So that's how those fit in. They fit in through the process from beginning to end. And because if you remember, my thing is iterative and cyclical, and you can iterate not only within phase, but also back and forth between phases. The whole thing is presented in a loop. You continuously update that iteratively. And I'll stop before I choke.
Please don't choke. Okay, Yulia, if you want to share again, do you understand that requirements and design cycle? It's a high level requirement, then you get more granular and more granular and more granular, and then you assess the outcome. And
throughout the project. So, right.
And it can be at a requirement, at a specific requirement level, or it can be at a project level, either one. So let's say I have a project and I want to say, okay, I want a new television. Well, why do I want it? I want it for entertainment. What are the needs? It needs to be 80 inches or something. What is it I want? I want a I'm getting 4K. Is that what it is? I'm getting more and more requirements, more granular. What are the conditions? I want remote control. I want surround sound. And then you could say, okay, is that what I got? I mean, so that's like at a project level where you start gathering requirements, but then with each of the requirements, you might have to have subsections. Not each of the requirements. Each of the sections of the project, you might have to have the same kind of evaluation of why do I want it? Let's say I'm going to create a website, and with the website, I need a UI that has a chat bot. And so you need to go through the requirements for the chatbot. What is it for? How is it going to react? What kind of questions is it going to have? What are the conditions at which it will, will it only talk to people in the United States? You got to figure out what are the requirements, and then you assess your outcome.
I would say I understand it as that it's like a check if you really need that need. Maybe business need, there is a business need, but then you go through cycle, and then at the end of the day, like, no, this is not maybe what we want or what we need.
Or it may be that you find out that the effort or cost is going to take to create that isn't worth what you so you got to do that evaluation.
Nice, thank you. Second, the most important question, page 51. It's chapter 3, the last task where you identify business analysis performance improvement and output of the task. One of the outputs has that root cause analysis of any variances from expected performance, right? This is the output. But throughout the chapter, not a single word about root cause analysis. Chapter 51.
Okay, let me look
not
at this.
Not a single word.
Let me just orient myself to what we're talking about here.
Okay.
So this is the section 3.5, identify business analysis performance improvements, correct?
Correct.
Okay, the purpose
And then
is
if you
to assess business analysis work and plan the improved processes where required. And your question is, why is the
output on my
why is the
screen?
output talk about root cause of variance? Okay, I understand your question now. So that entire section is talking about how we do our job and how we can do it better, right? So whenever you get into root cause, you're right, root cause is not mentioned anywhere else in that section. But whenever you're talking about root causes, you have to look at, okay, so I've identified this problem. What is causing the problem, which is the root cause analysis, right?
In this case, shouldn't be in elements, because I notice consistency. Whatever it's in elements of the task, it will be in output, basically.
It should be, but this time they didn't do it that way. Just know that whenever we're talking about trying to solve a problem, we always have to look at the root cause.
Okay. It's just I found it weird because all chapters are structured in the same way. This is how I remember. Okay, I don't really need to memorize output, because you need to memorize elements, and all elements are outputs of the task. And this one was
your observation of that is one of the reasons I love the way your brain works. But you're right. In this case, it didn't follow that pattern.
Did not. Okay, this is very interesting question. Requirements architecture. I read that about it. It's from chapter 7, right? The most difficult chapter in the book, requirements analysis and design definition.
This is page 149?
Yes.
Okay, let me go to 149.
Was actually chapter is not that terrible, it makes sense, but define requirements architecture was very painful. Does not give much information. I kind of understand why we do it, but it would be nice to see an example, because I haven't seen it in my past work.
Well, okay. As I told you, as we were writing this, they kept preaching to us that we couldn't give examples. We had to be descriptive, not prescriptive, which just made me crazy, because as business analysts, it is our job to help communicate clearly. And sometimes giving examples is the best way to communicate clearly. But they also had the limitation of, this is an international audience with people with different industries and everything. So they didn't want us to write it in, they didn't want us to give an example that would only follow, be an example for, say, software development or something. Bob, do you have an example of requirements architecture?
Actually, yeah, maybe while Bob is looking for an example, let me explain what I understood about requirements architecture and why we need it. Basically, it helps you to categorize your requirements, to understand what kind of categories of requirements you have.
Okay.
For a change or for initiative, right?
Yes, exactly. And one of the things that Bob and I talked about whenever I was in Florida last is it would be awesome if everyone, whenever they started a project, had a basic outline of requirement categories, and that the requirements would fall underneath that category. For instance, if you had a category of what would the UI be? What would the access systems be? So it's in categories, and that would create your basic architecture. So it'd be kind of like an outline of, these are your requirements, these are the sub requirements, so that you have, it ends up being, make it logical. So number one, you don't miss anything. And number two, it's easy to not have duplicates, because if you've ever worked with Jira or TFS or something, people are putting stories in there, and you may have two different stories about the same thing, but because nobody had an architecture written out, and honestly, an Excel or Word document with architecture of the requirements is so beneficial. So let me work on getting you an example of a requirements architecture this week, and I will send it to you. Would that work?
Yeah, anytime. Does not have to
Okay.
be this week, but I understand that it's very important topic, but I'm not sure how to use it in a real time, in a real world. Yes, Bob.
Well, I've seen it used several different ways. One of my favorite ways to do it is set it up with either epics or themes or something like that within Jira, so that, say, everything that is a integration between system A and system B, whether it's a feed from A to B or B to A, whatever those integrations are, that would all be under one epic, and it would all be underneath that one section in the architecture. So it's our integrations. And underneath each of those integrations, it would identify what fields were going to be available. Would it be scheduled or triggered? Would it be a push or a pull? Who's going to supply the API? You know, all of the things that have to be known to get that thing accomplished. So you've got all your details there in one place, and it is effective by grouping them by epic or theme or feature. It depends on which tool you're using. But that's my favorite way to use it.
Simpler way to think about it, and that is that the massive requirements is the abstract to be state. That is an architecture. Now, if you want to impose some other internal structure on it, which probably happens anyway, if you remember what we talked about in requirements traceability, it goes in time through the project or through the engagement, but also perpendicular to that for the internal organization of the architecture of the project. That's all that is.
Bob, do you have an example of a requirements architecture outline or some kind of structure that we can provide?
No, I just have my typical depiction of the requirements trace matrix, but I'm not sure that helps.
Okay.
In theory, if you've written down all your now let's think of a fairly trivial process or project, and we'll think waterfall. So you just do your intended use, do the what's going on or the conceptual model, do the requirements. When you've identified all the requirements, that's an architecture, right? Then
Right.
you do design, that's an architecture. Then you do implementation, that's an architecture. So the internal organization, how all the pieces of all those elements interact with each other is the architecture.
Does that answer your question, Yulia?
Yeah, I get an idea, but example would be great.
I will put together an example. And I'm thinking if I gave you a project of building a school, and so building the school, it's going to be in a chronologically linear format just for project management ease, and it's going to be in sections of preparing the ground, and then the plumbing, electrical, foundation section, and then the material delivery for the walls, and and then getting more and more refined after that. But it's just grouping it in logical containers.
Yeah, I got that part. I think okay. It's old.
Okay, let's do one more question, Yulia. What do
Yeah.
you want to do?
Oh, okay. Yeah, this one is quick. So we have a techniques, role and permission matrix. So basically, the purpose of the techniques where we identify roles, activities, and then we assign those activities to roles, right? So we know who does what, basically what it is. And I was wondering why it's not in conduct and elicitation knowledge area and plan stakeholder engagement task.
Well, okay, I think you might be getting a little bit confused. The roles and permissions matrix is the roles and permissions matrix is what I use whenever I am saying, okay, we've got 4 different levels of users for this software. We've got the casual user that can just look at everything. We've got a admin level 1 that can make changes in these low areas, admin level 2 that can make changes in these higher areas as well, and then a super admin. So Yulia is going to be a super admin, and she is going to be super admin in these 3 environments, but Bob is going to be a web user, and he's not going to have any edit ability. So that's going to tell the people, not only the people that work with permissions, what level of permission to assign to each of the individuals in the different environments, but it's going to help you determine it. If you get it started early enough in the process, you're able to build out your project, your software, to say, oh, that's something we should give to the admin level 1, or oh no, that's only for admin level 2, you know. So it's easier for them to kind of create the different levels of permissions. But the other things you're mentioning in that question is conducting a elicitation knowledge area, which it makes sense that you would say, well, what permission did you have in the previous software, and what permission do you think you should have in this software? You would, of course, ask that question, especially of the people that are planning the project. I don't know why it isn't mentioned there. And then plan stakeholder engagement.
Yeah, I mean, because we talk about roles as well, that's why I like, it's interesting why it's not there.
I don't know why they didn't mention it. It may just be something that it's like, okay, this is a technique. So it's not going to be a technique for everybody, because it's pretty much limited to only software development. You know, so if you're doing, let's say, you're working on benefits and they're not using any kind of software, they're doing it all on paper, you're not going to have a roles and permissions matrix in that. You're going to have everybody filling out their paper of their benefits.
Yeah, because they don't speak about it, and they just, for the purpose and description, they give you a be different impression of how to use this technique. And they just,
Right.
Okay, this is an example from this area, and that's it.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, maybe a super easy question, like some English language, for example, attributes and metadata, are they interchangeable in BABOK? Because, for example, on page 137, they say attributes or metadata. And I saw it several times when they refer it like this, and I just was curious if it's interchangeable.
Okay, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that they are interchangeable. They're just 2 different ways, 2 different possible ways to describe something. So metadata is information about data. So metadata about a column would be, this column is a name column. It allows upper and lowercase characters. It allows special characters. It does not allow numbers. It is 12 characters wide. It can have spaces. That's all I could think of that would be applicable to a name. So that would be metadata about that column. Attributes of that column. Bob, how is the best way to explain attributes? I've had projects, Yulia, that people used attributes of a table to be synonymous with columns of a table, of what are the things that belong in that table. So the name column would be an attribute of the table, but the metadata of the name column is much different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what metadata is. It's basically describes what data you are looking at, what is what,
Right.
How much is the size of the data, maybe where it was collected, how it was collected, stuff like that. It's just this paragraph, that's why it's confused me. It's in specifying model requirements, and they say, in addition to models used to represent requirements, this tax also includes capturing information about attributes or metadata about requirements. That's why, and I see it not first time when they say attributes or metadata. That's why I was curious.
The best I can tell you is, as I said earlier, in the project I'm currently working on, an attribute of a table can be a list of the columns in that table, and the metadata of the table is going to be totally different. So it's two totally different things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good to know. Page 48. Page 48 is going to be 3.5 elements. Okay, so what is the difference between performance analysis and assessment measures?
That's a very good question.
Sounds like, I mean, what they say does not tell me anything in assessment measures. I mean, for me, performance analysis, right? I'm looking, I'm basically comparing of my goal, right, and actual performance. So when I'm saying, okay, was it bad? I mean, I'm generalizing good or excellent.
Okay, so in some organizations they have KPIs that business analysts are required to meet. In other organizations they don't. So in the organizations that they have the KPIs, assessment measures would be taken into consideration. Performance analysis, I believe, is going to be much more judgment call. You know, I think you're doing really well because your projects are successful and your business users love working with you. That would be a performance analysis that doesn't necessarily require any formal documentation, but it would be an evaluation, right? Without things like you've got to create a business process document, a requirements traceability matrix, some of those things that would be potentially assessment measures. It's honestly going to depend on what type of organization you have and how they have it set up to do an evaluation of you.
Would it mean performance analysis in this case is more like I am presenting my results? Because in assessment measures, I already have measures, right? Or in assessment measures, I choose those measures, and in performance analysis, I analyze it based on that measures.
Well, the measures, I tell you what, let me study this a little bit more. It's been a little while since I looked at this one.
Mm-hmm.
So let me look at it and I will get back to you with the answer on that, okay?
Yeah, because this is what I understand. Assessment measures, I define what kind of measures I'm gonna do.
Well, yeah, either by your choice or by direction of your organization.
Yeah, because we also have analyze results. So basically here we set metrics You can hear me, right? I didn't
Yes,
disappear.
I can hear
The
you.
set metrics, here we analyze results. And here looks like performance analysis is more like formatting a report, report formatting, how I want to represent my information. If it's true, how I want to represent my information, it's if it is, I mean, it's a very strange name for it then.
It is a very strange name. Okay, let me look into this and ponder it a little bit. I'll see if I need to reach out to my folks at the IIBA and get a better answer for you.
Yeah. And yeah, I have few more questions, but it's okay. We can do it next time because it's already late. Everybody needs to rest. But
It is.
I really appreciate your time and feedback. Yeah, thank you.
It's okay. We can do it again next time.
Yeah. I will
Okay.
join.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. If you do have any questions or if you want to link to me on LinkedIn, go ahead and contact me through LinkedIn. Again, my name is Thea Raisins. My last name is spelled R-A-S-I-N-S, which is a little bit different than you would expect. And I'm pretty sure you can find me. If you have any questions, need mentoring, need a job, I'm getting contacts from recruiters every day. So if you're looking for a BA job, if you want a different BA job, let me know what you're looking for and I'll see what I can do to help you. Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
And everyone,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. You guys have a good rest of the week.
Thank you. You
Okay,
too.
everyone.
Bring other people next time. We'll keep making this better and bigger. Okay,
Bob,
guys,
feel
have a good
better.
week. Feel better, Bob.
Yeah, take care.
Yeah, bye.